Give me a Maleficent any day of the week, a Cruella, or a Jafar.
And don't forget Ursula, who is literally based on a drag queen. Hello, Sister Alaska Lott.
And I, with my clever disguise, you probably didn't recognize me. I'm Sister Babeushka.
This is complete and utter nonsense.
The show where we pour a piping hot cup of tea.
And we utter whatever nonsense pops into our heads.
This is basically a late chat back.
Late chat back. Ooh, late chat back. Ooh.
This is basically a laid-back chat amongst friends.
And we release a brand new episode once a month, every month on the first of the month. And we do random videos every other week as well.
This month, we usually have the International Film Festival on our doorstep. And so we thought it would be the perfect time to explore a very important question. Does LGBTQ plus representation matter?
For many in the LGBTQ plus community, representation in media is an important issue. But why is that? And does it really make a difference?
I'm going to say yes, it matters a lot. Media has the power to shape our perceptions of the world and the people in it. And for the LGBTQ plus community, representation in media can have a profound impact on our lives.
Representation has the power to change the way people view the queer community. And when wider society sees queer characters and storylines on TV and in films, it helps to normalise our existence and reduce the stigma and discrimination that many of us face.
And representation can also provide people with a sense of validation and belonging. When we see aspects of ourselves reflected in the media we consume, it helps us to feel seen and heard. It tells us that our stories matter and that we're not alone in our journey.
And this, of course, has a massively positive impact on mental health. In fact, there are several studies that have definitively shown that seeing positive representations of LGBTQ plus characters in media can help reduce depression and anxiety in queer people.
And it is fair to say that this works in the opposite direction as well, unfortunately, where when we do see negative portrayals of our community in whatever media is that the masses are consuming, that also does have an impact on how wider society sees our community and can also negatively influence people, which is why it is important that all representation is in a positive light.
I think that's really true, actually. And it's one of the reasons that people are so outspoken about people who publicly speak against members of the queer community, because it does have a very real impact on people's lives and a very harmful impact. Just going to name drop J.K. Rowling.
But wait, isn't it all just a story?
You're right. What about the arguments that representation media doesn't matter because it's just fiction? We hear that all the time.
It's a common argument, but it's not necessarily true. Fictional stories and characters can have profound impacts on us as we absorb the narrative that's being presented to us. And this, in turn, can then also change our perceptions and attitudes towards different groups of people that are being presented.
When we see positive representations of LGBTQ plus characters and stories, it can help create a more accepting and inclusive society. And honestly, it's something that's really needed. And for some reason, we seem to be going in the opposite direction.
It's the fact that people will use the argument of it's just fiction, it's just a story. But then on the other hand, to try and repress LGBTQ plus media, they'll say, oh, well, we shouldn't be showing our kids that kind of media. Therefore, defeating their own argument in a sense that actually it does matter with representation, doesn't it? And it's not just a story after all.
They get very upset about having a romantic couple that's same sex. And they're like, well, why does it even matter? It's just a story. But then every other couple is heterosexual and the kids are watching that. Like, what's the problem? It's the same thing. And if it doesn't matter, why would it matter to you that there's a queer couple in it?
Yes, it really does either speak of bigotry or just sheer ignorance of somebody's own privilege, that they can't recognize that their perceptions and their journey on throughout life has been perfectly presented 500 different times. But for that LGBTQ plus child that's just growing up, they're seeing nothing. And to give them that something, I mean, it doesn't take away from the 499 other pieces of heteronormative media, but it can be a lifeline to that one child growing up and helping them feel less alone.
Not everything has to be about you. Sometimes we should include representation for lots of different parts of society because it matters to them. It's the same for any number of minorities, really.
You mean society isn't all one homogenous block that's been presented to me throughout media for ages? What?
You know, right? It's not all white teenagers who live in massive mansions. Who'd have thunk it? You ever noticed how almost every TV house is like far bigger than it would be for that family? Like, no way in real life would those people with those jobs live in that house. It's not happening.
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, the media is literally all just that. It's just a construct for you to view a story. Half of it is always detached from reality to begin with.
Of course, we have referenced TV specifically, but actually this applies to a whole range of different media.
Let's not forget about representations in books, in podcasts that we listen to, in audio dramas, in comic books that we read, in huge amounts of things that we consume that we don't even necessarily think about.
LGBTQ plus representation in literature can be especially powerful because it allows us to actually see ourselves in the stories as we read and connect with the characters who experience similar struggles and triumphs to what we may do in our real lives.
Exactly. And representation in media can also create more empathy and understanding for LGBTQ plus community members among non-LGBTQ plus people when they're consuming these stories and empathize with those characters.
You're right. That's a really important point. And when people see these queer characters and storylines on screen or in other forms of media, it can help to break down stereotypes as well as misconceptions. And it can help create a more accepting and inclusive society as a result. It's
been really interesting when you think back on types of queer media that have been presented throughout the years, how often that will make headlines. EastEnders, a British sort of soap drama that has been going on for ages now. When they had their first gay kiss on screen, there was a lot of drama in the tabloids about calling it EastEnders and making it out like it was such a terrible thing that we were allowing our community to be shown on screen.
I think actually for many parts of society, when they see queer representations or representation of any minority on screen, it can often be like their first exposure to it. They live in a society surrounded by people who are like them. And so it's something that's very new, and having that representation be positive is actually really important. So they don't see these minorities as other. They understand that actually we're all just human and we have a shared human experience.
It comes back to that point sometimes that queer representation in media can be a lifeline for those that are maybe based more rurally rather than being city-based. Just from the sheer happenstance that in a more rural setting, you're less likely to meet other people of a diverse background. Queer media could be that sole exposure, as you've mentioned, to that one person and helping them really feel, that they're not alone, that they are represented, that there is a community out there for them.
And of course, we have to remember in the UK, there was at one time legislation that meant that a lot of young people who were growing up didn't have any exposure. It wasn't spoken about that queer communities were even a thing. And so seeing something in the media or reading about it or hearing it was about the only exposure you were going to get. And actually that made it really important.
And at this point, Babeushka would like to remind everyone, fuck the Conservatives, fuck Margaret Thatcher, and fuck Section 28 for all the damage it's done in hiding our community from all those that were growing up feeling lost, afraid, alone, and shunned. Fuck you, Tories!
And we would like to extend our commiserations to people in America who are currently going through a similar set of rules being put in place. We feel your pain. We've lived the pain.
I was at the drag show for Cheddar Gorgeous yesterday, and one of the drag acts actually did a piece on Section 28 and everything. So it was like, oh my God, I'm going to cry in the club. Very emotional. So very riled up for Pride Month.
I would be very interested to hear about a particular piece of queer media that you felt had a profound impact on you and how it affected you.
Oh, Babeushka does love telling a good waste story of her feelings. No, the glasses are making me do a completely different person.
When you get glasses on, you get fancier.
My media choice. Well, now that I've got my reading glasses on, let me tell you my media. No, take them off. So one piece of queer media, Mass Effect, produced by BioWare. And obviously, BioWare has also produced other RPGs in a similar vein that allow the same choices, but it was the fact that I was allowed to have a same-sex relationship with my main character and actually choosing to romance somebody of the same gender, which felt mind-blowing to me as somebody that's played many RPGs and you're stuck with the love interest who is always going to be the opposite gender of you because we can only have two genders and they can only fall in love and you can't pick anything else, even though it's your role-playing fantasy game.
I feel I had a very similar experience, but with a different game. It was probably around the same era. For me, it was Fable, the Fable series. And again, it was an RPG. And one of the things that Fable was particularly known for was it was built on choices. And what choice you made determined what type of character you were. So you become more and more good or more and more evil. And one of those choices was who you romanced. And you could choose to romance someone of the same gender or the opposite gender. In fact, it was around that time I was also quite astounded that I got to play a character that wasn't just a man. So not only could you choose someone who wasn't a man, but you could choose your sexuality too. And that was like fairly mind-blowing.
Absolutely crazy to think a little bit of inclusion in a role-playing game took so long to actually happen. Another piece of queer media that in that same vein of I can't believe it took so long, was that film that came out a few years ago in 2018, Love, Simon, which was a queer rom-com film, but it was the first time a major Hollywood production studio had led with a gay character. And it took till 2018.
When you think about it, there's still many firsts to happen. We've got a long way to go still, don't we?
Yeah, and I think part of that damage, at least on the American-centric side of things, comes down to the Hays Code that was enacted from the 1930-something up until, I think, late 60s, which basically had a whole list of things that you couldn't show in media. But it was clearly also targeted our queer community in that, you know, lesbians had to either be evil, die, or repent and see the evil of their ways. You couldn't have happy endings for queer characters. It was just such a ridiculous tightening of the belt on certain things that really did harm the queer community and probably has led to this ridiculous length of time that we've had to wait for some of these representations to be done.
I think really that's what was responsible for the beginning of queer coding in media, which we could probably do a whole separate episode about. But basically, it's when you've got characters that aren't openly queer, but they have stereotypical connotations that people would associate with queer people. Like in Disney films, they kept making the bad characters the queer coded ones. It was never the good characters.
And they wonder why all the queers then started to gravitate towards these fabulous fucking villains. Give me a Maleficent any day of the week, a Cruella, or a Jafar.
And don't forget Ursula, who was literally based on a drag queen. Let's talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because that for me was an awakening moment. Teenage years, and there we have a very cute Willow with her girlfriends. And I was like, oh, I think it just uncovered something that was already like I kind of knew, but I hadn't really locked into it. And then I was like, there are so many of these characters that I find cute, and it's not a gender thing. Like it's just if you're cute, you're cute.
Definitely. And I think the thing is, like, Willow is definitely an overlooked by representation trailblazer from that time.
It was so nicely done as well, because it didn't fall into the stereotypes that you often see for bi people. For example, being really promiscuous, or they just can't decide. There was none of that.
I think there was maybe a question of whether or not there was a videogames trope that showed up at the end of season 6. But I suppose, as terrible as it is that it happened, it did serve the story quite well and made an interesting arc, even if you really did want them to have a happy ending at the end of it all.
Yeah, it was a really nice bit of representation, and it mattered a lot to me, and I think helped me understand myself better.
Another piece of queer media that I'd probably mention would be the one that actually focused on intersectionality, because we know that although some queer people might just have one characteristic that is seen as a minority, some of us will face several different characteristics that overlap. And so there was a book that I read, Felix Ever After, that actually dealt with a queer trans Black protagonist, which again is something so rarely presented in a lot of media, but is actually such a lifeline to people that are actually facing these intersectioning aspects of their character.
I feel we definitely need more representation like that. I saw something recently where someone was saying that being Black and being queer felt almost impossible. And that's really heartbreaking. They definitely need more visibility in society, better representation. They need to feel like there's a place for them and that we're all in this together. But it's tough out there.
There's still a lot of space for our trans siblings, our intersex siblings, our asexual siblings, our BIPOC siblings. There's still so much scope. There's so much work to be done. And there are just so many more interesting stories that can be told rather than the same bland, generic, white, cis, heteronormative stories that we've been force-fed for God knows how long now.
I think even just from what we've been talking about today, it's clear that we need to continue to push for more diverse and authentic representations of queer people in media, including representation for people of colour, transgender people and non-binary people, as well as other underrepresented groups.
And we definitely need to continue to support LGBTQ plus artists, writers and creators who are actually out there right now trailblazing by telling our stories in their unique ways and helping showcase our community.
And if you would like to know more about different pieces of queer media and would like to perhaps add to your list of things to watch, read and listen to, I believe there might be somewhere that you can go to find out more information. Perhaps Babeushka would know something about it.
Oh, you caught me, Alaska. I couldn't keep it secret forever, could I? That's right. One of the other side projects that your lovely host Babeushka does is the Big Queer Media Review podcast, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. Every fortnight, Babeushka reviews a piece of media with a queer focus. So either again, the narrative focusing on part of the LGBTQ plus community, or it has been created by somebody of our community, and really just showcasing various different things from films, podcasts, books, comics, any type of media, it's on the list. Whether or not it's good representation, how it feels narratively, and then just giving you my thoughts and feelings on would I recommend it to you? So yeah, that's my podcast. There'll be a link below. You can check it out.
I can honestly say there's something really calming and soothing about listening to it as well. It's a really enjoyable listen. I love having it on in the background when I'm doing other things. Not that I'm biased or anything, but I highly recommend it. And so with that being said, I think that is it for our video today on why LGBTQ plus representation in media matters. There's plenty more that we could talk about. There might be future episodes on this subject. We shall see. But we hope in the meantime that you have learned something new and that you'll continue to support queer representation in media in all of its forms.
And just before we completely finish, I will give away that for anyone that hasn't yet got it, my makeup today has been inspired by Superman. And that is because the current Superman, or Superman's son, is actually bi. So there you go.
Fabulous.
We also need to let the people know What's coming up next month for when you choose to join us once more on our utterly nonsensical show?
For next month's episode, we are going to be revisiting one of the most hilarious Reddits that we have found, which is, are the cishetes okay? We're going to be looking to see just how awkward heteronormative culture really is. So join us next time for lots of laughs and memes.
I think we've done the thing.
I think we've done the thing. Done the thing. Done the thing. We've done the thing. We've done the thing. We've done the thing.